Arirang Special.
감사합니다. 국민 여러분의 위대한 선택에 머리 숙여 깊이 감사드립니다. 2017년 5월 10일 오늘 대한민국이 다시 시작합니다. 나라를 나라답게 만드는 대역사가 시작됩니다. 이 길에 함께해 주십시오. 저의 신명을 바쳐 일하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Korea has a new president in office, putting behind it a sprawling political scandal and the first ever impeachment of a sitting leader. People have high hopes for the new administration and the history that it will make for the next 5 years. Today, we'll take a closer look at some of the pressing issues at hand, especially on the diplomatic and economic fronts. For this, we are joined by Professor Kim Hyun-wook from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy and Professor Yang Jun-seok from the Catholic University of Korea. Welcome.
중앙선거관리위원회는 공직선거법 187조 제1항에 따라 유효 투표의 다수를 얻은 더불어민주당 문재인을 대통령 당선인으로 결정한다.
패배를 인정합니다. 하지만 저의 실패이지 새정치를 바라는 모든 분들의 실패가 아닙니다. 정치를 바꿔라, 경제를 바꿔라, 문재인 그 명령을 받들어 국민 대통령 시대를 열겠습니다. 정의로운 나라, 통합의 나라, 원칙과 상식이 통하는 나라다운 나라를 만들기 위해 함께해 주신 위대한 국민들의 위대한 승리입니다.
This election was far from ordinary. It carried a lot of weight, having come on the heels of an impeachment of a sitting president. Most likely because of that, we saw record turnout in early voting and overseas voting. And at the end of the day, more than 77% of eligible voters cast their ballots in this election. So, professors, first, let me ask you, what is your overall assessment of this election?
I think this election was the result of the impeachment of the previous president. I think there was a very big political scandal, and one of the things that is noteworthy is that people's demonstrations against that political scandal was, pursued very peacefully. One of my Chinese friends was kind of ridiculing at what happened at the time in Korea. Hey, your president is impeached. So I emphasize that this is the result of a peaceful democracy of Korean people, and China has to be envious about this fact. So I think throughout this process, the result was the election, and the result of the election was still the victory of Korean democratization. So I think the meaning of this election is that Korean democratization has been much more mature than before.
Professor Yang?
On a sort of similar line, given that this was a snap election that was not prepared for and came very suddenly, I think process-wise, mechanically, the election went amazingly well. So I think that shows that we have the infrastructure for a new political process. Now, having said that, though, because the election was rushed, I think some of the campaigning and some of the policy recommendations or policy proposals that the candidates had were maybe a bit undercooked and maybe not as full of details as you would have in a full elections where people had enough time to campaign. And also, one thing that is a bit worrying is that I think everybody agrees that because of the impeachment, right now what Korea needs is to come together, to unite, no matter which side of the political fence you are in. But this election, probably because it was accelerated, was, I think, very decisive, at least in terms of rhetoric. So I think, at least for some political parties and some politicians, they painted themselves into a corner where they'll have a very difficult time reaching out to people who are they were campaigning against during the elections. So we'll have to see how it goes on from here.
Well, there are very high hopes and expectations for the new president. It was a pretty sure victory for President Moon Jae-in. So that means the president has a lot on his shoulders.
Especially, I think, because he has to go straight into policy making right from today.
Without a transition
Right.
period.
So usually
right?
you have a 60-day transition period where you can find appropriate people, you can sort of work out the details of the policy promises you made, but now you have to go in straight. And as I mentioned before, a lot of the people are still angry about some of the rhetoric that was mentioned, but we need cooperation now more than ever because, well, this has been a very difficult process, not only in terms of impeachment, but because also the threat that we're facing from North Korea and a lot of diplomatic problems we have. So we need cooperation more than ever, but I'm not sure if the environment for cooperation was encouraged by this election.
Do you think President Moon will be able to mend ties between the different factions and ideological groups?
Well, I'm not sure, but it seems like it would not be an easy task in the future. I mean, the President Moon is emphasizing that there should be more integrated efforts in political sphere for peoples to get united and for policy to be pursued in the future into a one direction. But it seems like the other parties, of course, some of the parties will have their own risks, whether they would be able to survive in the future. But I think the conservative parties and so-called pro-Park Geun-hye faction inside that conservative party are still very, very influential in the political sphere. And I think their resistance against Moon Jae-in, or whether they can really cooperate with President Moon, I think that will be an important factor.
A recent survey asked people to rate the policies on which the new president should place the greatest focus. The results show that economic growth topped the list, followed by job creation, and then issues pertaining to unification, foreign policy, and national security. So it's not just experts, but also the public that see these as pressing issues. Now, during the campaign, we saw a lot of pledges on the economy and especially job creation. What is the current state of the Korean economy, and what are some problems that are weighing down growth?
Okay, well, we've been through the longest economic slowdown that I think we've ever had. I wouldn't call it a recession, but it certainly wasn't a healthy growth. So it's been the longest slowdown that we've ever had. But the good news is we seem to be turning the corner. A lot of the numbers that we see from the beginning of the year has been getting better. For example, last 2 years, the export volume for Korea, export amount has been falling, but this year it has started to recover. Now, we're still not up to the levels we saw in 2015, but still it stopped falling and it started rising, so I think people are getting much more optimistic. The consumer confidence index has turned to over 100 since in April. Over 100 means that they are actually optimistic about the future. So in order for Korea to have a full recovery, we need to have higher consumption, and the higher consumer confidence index does signal that there's a good chance that consumption will pick up. So if exports and consumption pick up, then investment will probably pick up also. So if we can keep this seed alive, then I think there's good hope for the future. But we still have a lot of problems that was revealed during the long slowdown. Some of them are short-term problems that we have to deal with. This president has to deal with. Some of them are long-term problems, which this president probably cannot solve during his term, but he'll have to start making some progress on it. For some short-term problems, we have the 13 trillion won household debt. We have very high youth unemployment, high unemployment for people who are just out of college. We have more increasing labor insecurity among people who have jobs. We have more rise in protectionism. These are all problems that has to be dealt with within the first few months of this administration. And then there's the long-term problems, which this administration also has to start dealing with, mostly very low productivity growth that we've seen in the last decade or 15 years, and then the rising demographic problem where the retired people are going to outnumber the working age people. So those are some of the problems that this president will have to face.
So in the end, economic recovery is on everyone's mind. What do we know so far of the new administration's economic policy direction?
Okay, well, President Moon, during his campaign promises, has been tended to be on the side of the more active government and more larger government. The election promise that he made most often is that he'll create jobs through creating more government jobs. So he's said that he'll create 18,000 jobs during this year. That's government jobs. Yes, and then throughout his term, he'll create 140,000 government jobs and 810,000 public-related jobs. Now, that may signal some good job opportunities for young people, so they're very in favor for it. But he hasn't been entirely clear on how he's going to get the money to pay for all these jobs. That's first problem. And then the second problem is because of the long slowdown, because of the job insecurity, the young people now definitely prefer government sector jobs over private sector jobs. Now, luckily, the economy is starting to recover. That means the private companies are going to look for more workers. But if they cannot find enough good workers because they all want to get government jobs, then that's going to create problems in the long run, especially for productivity. So that's another problem that President Moon will have to seek a balance on during first few months of his office.
Now, while Korea was struggling with a months-long power vacuum, tensions surrounding the Korean peninsula have been rising. Where do things stand at the moment?
Well, of course, the tensions in the Korean peninsula is coming from North Korea. I think North Korea has been continuing developing nuclear weapons and testing long-range missiles. And I think they have tested again missiles this year. And I think this kinds of threatening behaviors of North Korea have triggered President Trump. I think when President Trump came and inaugurated, his priority was not North Korea. He was ready to bash China. He was ready to bash Israel. All these kinds of things were priority. But I think at the time Kim Jong-un was testing missiles, I think North Korean nuclear missiles were threatening the United States, and possibility that it can really hit the mainland of the United States was rising. So I think these kinds of behaviors of North Korea was making President Trump very adamant that this time he has to make North Korea to stop developing nuclear weapons. So I think Trump's policy was very effective so far. Of course, there was some escalating tensions. I think by last month, April, there were possibility that North Korea can test 6 nuclear weapons. But I think Trump's sanctions and pressures were much harsher than before. So I think now with the help of China, the tensions in the Korean peninsula is a little bit getting lower and lower. But I think still the tensions are lingering. So
there are tensions that have risen as a result of THAAD deployment as well.
Oh, okay. THAAD deployment issue is also one of the tensions that South Korea has to face. But I think one of the point that we have to keep in mind is that once that deployment is finalized, I don't think there will be such a harsh Chinese pressures and sanctions on South Korea anymore. I mean, it's in the hope that China can possibly reverse the decision of South Korean, THAAD deployment in the territory. So I think, one of the reasons that they're still continuing the sanctions on South Korea is that they still have the hope that, President Moon can reverse the decision of THAAD deployment.
We'll talk more about THAAD in just a bit. In the meantime, in the field of the economy, a lot of Koreans are hoping for a pickup and more jobs. You did mention the president pledging to create more jobs, especially in the public sector, but you also touched upon the fact that the funding is not very clear, and we're all wondering whether it's all going to boil down to tax hikes. Right. What are some available options?
Okay, well, it's not just the public sector jobs, but he has promised a lot of subsidies, a lot of support for the young people who are just starting out, for old people, especially if they have Alzheimer's. All that is going to take a lot of money. Now, what I think President Moon is hoping is that the economic growth will take care of some of the need for it will lead to additional tax revenues, so some of it will be taken care from there. And I think what needs to be emphasized is that for the last few years, Korea has actually been running something close to a budget surplus. If you remember the last supplementary budget we had last year, it was financed entirely through additional tax revenues, and we did not increase the tax debt, government debt that much at all. So there is some room to spare there, and Korea's government debt to GDP ratio is still on the lower side compared to other OECD countries, so we have the capacity to borrow, but President Moon has left the option of increasing taxes. He's mentioned corporate taxes a few times, and he's also mentioned tax on the rich. And if he actually gets all of his policy wishes through, then there probably will need to be at least some type of tax increase for corporations and the rich. And he may even prefer that because one of his campaign promises was to try to make income and wealth distribution a bit more equal. And that's one of the ways of achieving that goal.
Yeah, one of the first things he did, President Moon Jae-in did on his first day in office was to create a presidential jobs committee. So do you think his plan of creating these jobs will be effective enough?
Well, if he creates government jobs, there'll definitely be a lot of, especially young people who want to take that job. So I think in that sense, it'll be successful. But the problem is, well, if it's very difficult to eliminate government jobs once you hire them because they are protected by law. That was originally meant because they didn't want the government workers to be affected too much by politics. But say if the worst case scenario happens and Korea has too much government debt, or if the government sector is drawing too much people out of the labor pool, then it'll be very difficult to reduce that government employment pool. So that's the first problem. And then the second problem is you have, because the government guarantees their pension, if you have too many government workers, then the pension obligations will rise as well, but this will come after President Moon's administration is over. So he may be passing the problems into the future. So again, that'll be he'll have to seek some sort of balance on that when he tries to get these policies through the National Assembly.
Well, money is going to be an issue on the defense front as well. U.S. President Donald Trump has already talked about having Seoul pay for the THAAD deployment. Do you think Washington will continue to pressure Seoul to pay more for defense?
Yes, I think he means when he said. I mean, the senior advisor McMaster and Korean counterpart had talked about the THAAD, South Korea paying for THAAD, which is not in the agreement. But President Trump's intention was different. He still insisted that South Korea has to pay for it. But I think this is also one of his bargaining style. I think his style is to have power peace through power. So I think that's one of the reasons that he is, raising the defensive budget. But also by using that power, he's trying to have the transition that can serve for his own interests and the United States' interests. So I think this is his type. He's pressing the partners so that the partner could follow the route of transactions that he wants to follow. So I think this would go into the next year defense budget sharing, negotiation zone. So I think we have to be ready for it, but not be pretty much, swaggered by what he mentions. But we have to be, ready for what kind of strategies we have in the negotiations.
So the U.S. might not make Seoul pay for THAAD itself, but during next year's defense budget sharing negotiations, there could be added pressure.
Sure, I think
the
next year negotiation will include the THAAD issues also.
Now, while campaigning, the president had said the THAAD issue should be reviewed by the new administration. Now we have a new administration. THAAD is a divisive issue not only among the Korean public, but also with neighboring countries as well. How do you think President Moon should approach this?
Well, I think, he mentioned that the THAAD issues will be reviewed in the National Assembly, and I think he would do that. I think the possibility that the decision will be reversed is very low, but we also have to think about the other case in which the THAAD deployment would be reversed in the Congress, in the National Assembly. But I think the most optimal, routine we can think of is that, it's not easy for the THAAD already deployed in the territory to be reversed and bring back to the United States. So I think the fact is fact, but the next THAAD deployment or THAAD purchase by South Korean government should be something we have to rethink, and something that the Korean people or in the National Assembly we have to review that kind of next stage of THAAD deployment, I think.
Meanwhile, China's unofficial sanctions against Korea over THAAD are still ongoing, and some industries obviously are more affected by those than others. How are things looking as of now?
Okay, well, I think Chinese government right now is sort of playing it down a bit because they don't want to affect the elections too much. I think they have the idea that if they play this up now, then it'll give more strength to anti-THAAD. It's pro-THAAD groups rather than anti-THAAD groups. But a lot of the sanctions are still going on. But number-wise, it's not as bad as I think a lot of people fear. The Korea International Trade Organization has calculated, and they think Korean loss is about 8 trillion won, while the Chinese have taken a loss of about 1 trillion won. That sounds like a lot, but compared to the GDP, it's not that much. I believe it's Oxford Economics. They've calculated what the Chinese sanction would cost Korea, and the highest figure they got was perhaps 2% of the GDP, which is not a small number, but it's not a number which can cause a disaster either. Now, if you look at the areas more specifically, there are some companies like Lotte Mart or some duty-free shops which are definitely getting the brunt of the hit here. But if you look at cosmetic exports overall, it actually rose by quite a bit during the first quarter of this year. If you look at exports to China, it actually rose something like 13% again during the first quarter of this year. The thing is, most of the things that Korea exports are intermediate parts and capital goods that Chinese need to make their own exports or to run their own economy. So as long as they don't start expanding the sanctions into intermediate goods, the amount of harm that they can do is rather limited. It's limited to whatever consumption good exports we have, which is about 5%, and perhaps tourism. But while the majority of the harm that we've seen so far is coming from tourism, it's been not as bad as some people feared, because there's apparently a lot of other tourists from other regions who are coming into Korea, as well as people who wanted to go to China, but now they're staying in Korea and going to places like Jeju Island instead. So the harm hasn't been as big as perhaps what a lot of people feared.
So would you agree with Sir Kim that once that deployment is finalized and the new government has made its position clear, China will start to take back these so-called unofficial sanctions?
I think so, but until we make a definite decision, there's a good chance that they'll up the pressure. Because so far they've been very smart about this, I think, the Chinese. They've tried to do maximum harm to Korea while minimizing the harm to themselves. So it's not really costing them very much to run these type of sanctions. So there's a chance, I think, that during, say, the debate on whether we should have that or not, if one takes place, the sanctions will get worse before it gets better.
Well, another issue of concern is a potential renegotiation of the Korea-US FTA. What can Korea do to counter these increasing protectionist policies from the U.S.?
Okay, well, we still have a little time. President Trump has asked the Treasury Department and the USTR to write up a report on the reasons for the U.S. trade deficit and what in the trade agreements that U.S. has that needs to be changed. And that's due in about 4 or 5 months, so Korea has at least until then to make our plans. Now, KORUS FTA is the second largest FTA that the United States has. And because the U.S. is such a large market, if there's going to be conflict, Korea will on the net lose, but we do have a lot of leverage of our own. For example, Korea is right now the second largest market for American beef. And the tariff rate for beef, if you're not an FTA member, is 30%. And the American beef's biggest competitors, Australia and New Zealand, both have an FTA with Korea. So their tariffs are right now falling from 30% to 0% in 20 years. Whereas if KORUS FTA is nullified, then they'll have to go back up to the 30% tariff, and that means the Korean market is out of competition for them. So we do have leverage. But Trump is a very hard bargainer. That's what he prides himself on. So I think Korea will have to decide what it's willing to give up. And if necessary, we'll have to at least have the option of nullifying KORUS FTA ourselves to make credible threats against whatever threats the U.S. brings about changing the agreement. If the one side is hard bargainers, then we have to be hard bargainer as well.
Does Seoul have to accept a request, if there is such a request from Washington, for renegotiation?
Either side has the ultimate veto. They can just withdraw themselves from the FTA if they give a 180-day notice. But right now, everyone except people closest to Donald Trump is saying that United States has gotten a lot out of the FTA as well. If you look at the last year's USTR reports, they had small problems here and there, but they were generally satisfied with how KORUS FTA was going. So at least for the United States, businesses in general, I don't think they're interested in getting rid of KORUS FTA. I think they're much more interested in is trying to do something about certain sensitive industries, getting more automobiles into United States, more American automobiles into United States, and perhaps limiting steel exports to the United States, perhaps accepting more American agricultural goods into Korea. So I think they'll concentrate on some very sensitive industries and goods, and in order to get that, they may threaten nullification of the whole agreement. But if the agreement is completely nullified, I think that'll hurt the U.S. as much as Korea.
Well, you said this, but you've said this before, but Korea is an export-reliant economy, so we need to look for every opportunity to increase our exports. Now, there is talk of reviving the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. Could that be an option for Korea?
Okay, it's been sort of running under the radar. Japan has been trying to keep the TPP alive, but what we've been hearing sort of unofficially and through unofficial news reports is saying that they're having a difficult time keeping the TPP alive, which is not that surprising because TPP was created as a balance with United States using its large market size to impose a lot of the provisions which were favorable to the United States. So now the United States is gone, but those provisions remain in the written agreement. So it'll be very difficult to pass TPP as is, and I'm not sure if the member countries have the stomach to try to renegotiate the whole thing. I think from the Korean side, perhaps a better strategy would be try to accelerate RCEP as much as possible, which is the regional FTA with ASEAN and China, Japan, and Korea, and then invite the TPP countries who are not members of RCEP already to join the RCEP. And we don't have to do this, we don't have to complete the agreement anytime soon, but start reaching out to European Union for some kind of an agreement between, say, RCEP and the EU. I think that'll put the pressure on the United States to fear that they're falling behind on globalization, and that may nullify a lot of Trump's protectionist tendencies.
I noticed that many issues that took center stage during the election period stemmed from comments made by U.S. President Donald Trump. That's how sensitive we are to what Washington has to say or not. Do you think, as some say, that the Seoul-Washington alliance is being put to the test?
Yeah, there were some comments by President Trump about, that paid by South Korea, or South Korea has to pay more of costs for the U.S. forces in Korea, so on and so forth. Also renegotiation of cross-FTA issues like that. But I think, based upon Trump's perspective, I think he's looking at alliances, not only U.S.-South Korea alliance, but NATO and other alliances too, very much based upon national, U.S. interests. But U.S.-Korea alliance has been built up historically, fought together against the North Korean threats, have a long time built on the same values and trust, mutual trust. So I think these kinds of perspectives that we shared about the U.S.-South Korea alliance is not shared by President Trump, and I think that's one of the challenges we have to face. So I think President Moon's visit to Washington D.C. is important in the sense we have to have the same kinds of strategies as Trump has on South Korea, but at the same time, what is also important is to, bolster the personal ties with President Trump. Yeah. I think as, President Trump has shown some favors to some kinds of leaders, and I think, personal ties is more important than the, state-to-state.
Yeah, well, while Korea was going through a leadership vacuum, there was something, a term that the local media have coined, Korea passing, as in the possibility of Washington and Beijing bypassing Seoul in important decisions about the Korean peninsula. Do you think we need to be worried about that now that we have a president?
Well, we had a political vacuum.
Yeah.
Transition government was not treated very well equally by the President Trump. So I think this has made other countries' cooperations with the United States about the Korean Peninsula issues very much, close. And so I think this is something we have to, do more in the future with President Trump, have more close coordinations with the United States. I think that's the homework of South Korea in the future. But I think President Trump's policies towards North Korea and President Moon's policy towards North Korea seems pretty much similar in some sense. Of course, the surface so-called progressive party seems pretty much in conflict with the United States, but the contents of foreign policies and contents of North Korea policy is very much similar. I mean, he focuses on transactions, and Moon Jae-in also focuses on negotiations. And I think they're all trying to use both ways of tools like sanctions and dialogue altogether. So the content seems they're fine to mingle together and coordinate with each other.
Well, President Moon did say in his inaugural address that he's ready to fly to the U.S. to meet the leader anytime. But we also have to deal with China, given the importance of China in dealing with North Korea-related matters. So how should Seoul approach ties with Beijing?
Well, as far as North Korea issues related, it seems like the Trump's pressure seems very effective so far. I mean, China is moving the way Trump wants China to move. But I don't think Chinese policy towards North Korea has fundamentally shifted. I mean, because Xi Jinping has to think about the domestic, power solidarity, and he has to show to the domestic political spheres and people that he is negotiating and he is cooperating with the United States, not pushed back by the United States. So in that sense, it's the current move seems like their U.S. and China is cooperating about North Korea issues, but I think China still values the buffer state, North Korea, and would not move far beyond to the level that would collapse the regime of North Korea. And before that happens, I think China would try to change the current phase into dialogue. So I think for South Korea, this is very good timing. We can cooperate for pressuring and to make North Korea move towards the denuclearization. So I think so far we have to get ready to go to the cooperation with the United States and China.
Which side do you think the new administration will reach out to first, the U.S. or China?
I think so far, for now, it's definitely United States. I mean, there were some, debates whether it should be the U.S. and China. It should be the choices should be made between two superpowers during the Obama government, in which the U.S. economy was terrible. U.S. engagement in Asia was very minimal. But I think now the U.S. economy has recovered, and based upon their capabilities, U.S. is now coming back to Asia. So I think the policies towards Asia and North Korea, the initiatives is taken by the United States. So all the kind of policies of South Korea, whether it's with China, should be based upon the strong alliance with the United States.
Now, as for North Korea, we can probably expect more efforts to engage North Korea through dialogue. But what about joint projects like the Kaesong Industrial Complex or Mount Kumgang tours? Any chance that they might even be restarted?
I think President Moon's plan is to restart all that kinds of moves to, heighten the, dialogue with North Korea. But he made it clear that until North Korean nuclear program is frozen, there will be no, serious moves to develop North-South Korea relations. So I think before that happens, I think what President Moon can do is, non-governmental moves to develop North-South relations,
like humanitarian,
humanitarian issues and other non-military or non-political moves like a sports diplomacy, something like that. So I think in that sense, Kaesong Industrial Complex, in which governments intervene, would not be initiated in the beginning, I think.
Not while there are strong international sanctions against North Korea. Now, the Kaesong complex shutdown was a huge loss for many South Korean companies as well. If it does reopen, could we expect to reap enough economic benefits?
Well, we might be forbidden from going in the first place. Professor Kim probably knows the details more than I do, but my understanding is that until the UN embargo is lifted, we cannot start an operation like Kaesong or Mount Kumgang tourist project anyway. But if that sanction is lifted and they try to start Kaesong project again, well, it's already been canceled once by North Korea. It's been canceled once by South Korea. So you have to wonder whether any potential entrepreneurs are willing to go through that risk again. As long as those kind of precedents weren't there, then they could justify that there's very little risk. But now they know that these type of solid risks exist. And frankly, the companies which came out of Kaesong are still having a lot of problems, even though the government said that they will support them to the best of their abilities. So given that type of situation, I think they're going to have a very difficult time finding investors unless there's a lot of subsidies coming their way.
So it might be realistically impossible.
I would say so.
Okay. Now, we still have a lot of tension around the Korean Peninsula because of Pyongyang's nuclear program and Washington's very hardline position. How do we contain the nuclear threat from the north?
President Moon is a negotiator. He is a peacemaker. So I don't think he will try to make South Korea a nuclear state or any attempts to bring the U.S. tactical nuclear weapons back into South Korea. I think his way to denuclearize North Korea would be based upon sanctions and dialogue. I mean, the current, diplomatic efforts to denuclearize North Korea would be the central to his policies towards North Korea. At the same time, I think he will try to develop a Korea air missile defense system. I mean, he thinks that that deployment would not be a very optimal one. That would be something determined in the Korean Assembly. But I think once that is deployed, I think he will try to mingle it with Korea air missile defense system. So I think more of a defensive measures vis-a-vis North Korean nuclear missile threats would be something he will think about.
Now, whenever a new government comes in, we always hear about reform. One of the issues the president had campaigned for was chaebol reform. How do you think he's going to go about doing that?
Okay, well, one of the more interesting things is that almost all the candidates said that they will reform chaebol in some way, even the parties which you would not normally expect chaebol reform. Right? So all the candidates pledged corporate governance reforms to give non-majority stockholders more say in the management decisions, and that'll probably get through National Assembly fairly easily because, well, every party promised it. Now, beyond that, there has been discussions on whether we should enforce competition policy in a stronger way by strengthening the Fair Trade Commission. Moon Jae-in has promised moves along that front, so that's he'll probably try to put that through. Also, I think the President Moon during the campaign was much more favorable toward limiting the powers of chaebol directly through laws and regulations. For example, limiting the areas where they can go into, limiting the industries, limiting the access to so-called neighborhood markets. So I think he'll be much more legally and regulatory inclined to use those tools to limit chaebol's power. Having said that, though, there may be a lot of resistance because he does not have majority in the National Assembly, and we'll have to see what kind of coalitions he can make, and depending on the coalitions, some of the more tougher sanctions against the chaebols may not take place.
The new administration will have to reestablish its foreign policy. The tricky part will be finding the right balance with the U.S., China, and Japan. What would be your advice?
Well, based upon his foreign policy platform, I think his ultimate goal in his foreign policies and North Korea policies is to develop North-South Korea's relations and also share the same markets of North and South Korea, which can be, I think, based upon his ideas, very firm basis for future unification of two Koreas. So I think in order to achieve this goal, I think two things. First one is that the Korean Peninsula should not be the ones that U.S. and China would talk and decide everything about it. The second one is that the Korean Peninsula should not be the place that U.S. and China would have conflicts about. So I think his way of diplomacies and important tools to achieve these kinds of goals would be to make the Korean Peninsula stable. evade any possible conflict with neighboring countries.
We also have to mend ties with Japan. Ties have been strained.
Yeah, that's
over several
one of
issues.
the homework we have to solve. He mentioned many times that he will renegotiate with Japan about the comfort women issues, reflecting the Korean people's and grandmothers' ideas and opinions and that kind of things. So I think there might be some initial frictions with Japanese government, but I think it will ultimately, come to a ideal result, whether it's by renegotiations or partial negotiations.
What are your hopes for the new administration?
Well, I think this administration hopefully can achieve a more integration of peoples and political, divided political spheres, and also hope that he can build some cornerstones for the unification of the Korean Peninsula. There have been a more and more growing threats of North Korea, but we have to admit that the ultimate goal of North Korea policy is to achieve unification. I think that's a fundamental and ultimate goal. So I think those two things he wants to focus on.
What about you, Professor Yang?
Okay, well, I think everybody hopes that the Korea will unite again, because they've been so, it's been split up so much during the last 5 years. But having said that, though, in the National Assembly, President Moon's Democratic Party only has about 40% of the vote. You need 50% to get laws through the National Assembly, and if you're using the accelerated process under the special legislative laws, you need 60% majority, and it's going to be very tough achieving 60% majority. They're going to have to form coalitions, whether mergers of the parties or working coalitions. I don't know what form it'll take, but he'll have to form some kind of coalition in the National Assembly if he wants to get these type of policies through. Now, what I'm hoping is that he'll recognize the importance of both short-term and long-term problems that I talked about during the beginning of the show. I think there's a tendency for some people to concentrate on the long-term problems or short-term problems, but not both. And you really do need a balanced view of how to solve those two problems, because sometimes solving the short-term problems makes the long-term worse, or vice versa. And I hope that President Moon does look at the balance of short-term and long-term problems and make a balanced decision. And in a sense, perhaps having this type of split National Assembly will help, because hopefully it'll draw in some of the excesses. One of the problems with, I think, Korean politics in general and economic policies in particular is that when you have a ruling party, they tend to just do everything that they want, and sometimes it includes a lot of good policies, but sometimes it contains a lot of extreme, questionable policies. So maybe if they can find a way to work together, then the split National Assembly will rein in some of the more extreme, questionable policies and get a workable policies with balance of long-term and short-term problems.
Well, so for that to happen, for President Moon to be able to earn the cooperation of the opposition parties, I think he'll have to strive to achieve what Professor Kim mentioned first, to achieve some sort of unity among the different social groups and ideology.
I think he did something which is symbolic, which is very good, which is visit all the opposing parties the day after he got elected, and especially for the Justice Party, because they're so small and they're considered fairly radical. I think the Justice Party people said that this is the first time a sitting president ever visited them. So I think that's a good symbolic start. But when you get down to politics and economic policies, it's not all symbolic. Now they're going to have to discuss the actual gains and losses, not just to the country, but for their
Clashing
own party.
interests, yeah.
So it's going to be very complex. We've only seen a few hours of his actions since he's been president, but he's been making more or less the right moves, I think.
Now, you mentioned at the start of the show what you told your Chinese friend about the peaceful demonstrations here that triggered this whole change. If you think about it, for the past 6 months or maybe even longer, Koreans have been through quite a bit, but we achieved a lot at the end of the day. What kind of Korea would you hope to see emerge out of this experience?
Well, I think the Korean people have been maturer than before. I mean, the previous government, there were no communications between what people want and what presidents were doing. So I think we were beginning to take more and more initiative, and I think President Moon is ready to listen to what people wants to do. So I think hope that this would enlarge into the entire Korean Peninsula. Hope that these kinds of democratic moves can be something that spill over into North Korean people. While in order to achieve unification, some of the changes by contact with North Korea is something essential by which we can change the mindset and the style of what North Korean people are thinking about, by which they can we can make them envy for South Korean systems and South Korean democracies. So I think this kinds of move of South Korean people can be something that work as a very important order for achieving unification.
Well, I'd like to thank you two very much for sharing your insights with us today, and let's keep our fingers crossed. A lot of people will be looking forward to the changes to come under the new president. Let us all hope for the best. That is all we have for you today. Thanks for watching.